Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villeries Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villeries provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villeries Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters, as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Happy Mardi Gras to one and all as we roll on here with another show for you. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we'll talk a lot about the home teams, the Saints, the Pelicans, also LSU, Tulane. We'll talk about National Signing Day, and we have a great panel to break it down for you tonight. Les of CrestCitySports.com and so much more. Rene Nadeau of CrestCitySports.com and, oh yeah, a whole lot more. Both of those guys will tell you a little bit about what they're involved in. Both gentlemen join me on the panel tonight. And welcome, my friends. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. And Les, we'll start with you. Why don't you let the folks know where they can find all your great writing? And by the way, I was neglected to say, award-winning journalist right here. Yeah, you're right. Well, we like to give credit where credit is due. Congratulations.
Well, thanks, Eric. Good to be back with you and with my friend and colleague over here. As you mentioned, I'm writing with CrescentCitySports.com. Also NOLA.com. Those are the most prominent areas locally, but I also write a lot about LSU and the SEC football for SaturdayDownSouth.com, and there's a new website out there called FieldLevelMedia.com, and I do a lot of college basketball, including LSU and Pelican stuff for them, and cover the Saints for the Sports Exchange, and do some AP stuff now and then. So trying to stay busy.
Yep. Welcome back. And of course, we're taping this show on a Wednesday. Normally we're live on Thursdays, and you'll be heading over to the Pelican game as soon as we finish up today. Pelicans and Pacers tonight.
Yeah, and we'll get into this in a little more detail later, but obviously a state of transition for the Pelicans, and you don't really know what you're getting from night to night. So, and the Pacers are not an easy team to face.
Yeah,
so
no
that'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Oladipo will be interested to see if he plays, and of course the whole situation there as well. Rene, welcome back. Always good to have you. Rene, of course, does a great job at CrestCitySports.com. But tell us all the other things that you're involved in.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be here, Eric, and with you and Les tonight. And I do write with CrescentCitySports.com, cover a variety of areas. During the football season, mostly, I'm a color analyst with a couple of different networks, ESPN and some college football. I also work for CBS Radio and WFAN for Saints games and some Pelican stuff and some bowl games and things like that. But a lot of stuff is focused on college football and recruiting. And today is like Christmas Day in college football.
It has changed, though, a little bit now with, again, the early signing period. I don't want to say it was anticlimactic because there were a lot of good players that were out there. LSU really had kind of cast their lot on these last few players they could bring in. A little disappointment in Tigerland, the way things kind of turned out. But from your standpoint, what do you think about the early signing period?
I was wrong because I really thought there were about 70% of the players signed in the early signing period. And I really thought it would be a little less than that. And the reason being, across the board, a lot of young men are going to hold off and before they sign, before the ink dries, they want to make sure that the recruiter that recruited them is going to be there. And if you sign the early signing period in December, there's a chance in January or February the coach could leave for greener pastures. So I really didn't think there's this many kids in the early signing period, and it remains to be seen if it will follow this trend next year. But it did make the job a little easier for college recruiters because most of their signing class, in most cases, of course, the ULL, for example, with a new coach and things like that, Southeastern with a new coach, and they're going to hold off until the coach is in place. But I don't know if this trend will continue. It might be just the first year this happens, but this is why when a school only has a few slots to fill, in LSU's case, so much more attention is focused because percentage-wise, when you're trying to get 3 players and lose maybe 2 out of 3, so much more attention. But if it had been a total class, it may not have been, it wouldn't have taken a brunt of as it did.
It seems like that maybe the players like it, but I don't know if the coaches like it. What are you hearing from both sides?
I don't think, across the board, I don't think too many college coaches really like the early signing period. It spreads them out. It's right after the season's over, before the bowl season. It kind of splits them up a little bit, and it's a little double duty. And I think it's a little bit tougher on the college coaches the way it is set up now. And I think it's going to be here for a while, but they're going to learn to adjust to it. But it's a little bit tougher. But I guess if you're lucky enough to get the players signed that you want, it's all gravy from then on.
Let's talk first of all about the LSU class. Again, outside of this class, a pretty decent class. I think it was ranked 12th by rivals going in, and a lot was said about Surtain and Goodrich and Foster and of course Jamar Chase, some of the players that they really targeted. Of course, they lose out on Surtain and Goodrich early, and Foster earlier this morning. I can tell you right now, based on my radio show today, based on what I've heard from other shows throughout the day, people are very, very upset about what happened. People are very, very down on what happened, as you mentioned, because a lot of focus is on these last few players that really would have completed this class. Your thoughts about today, and then I'll get your thoughts on the overall class.
Well, what happened today, it is really, really tough to gauge how an 18-year-old is going to make a decision, and so much is at stake. Patrick Surtain not only represented a guy they thought they had, but a position of need. Cornerback is right now is very thin. It's very much like the offensive line last year, and losing Surtain is like losing, unless I was telling you, we were talking about this before, a guy from Dutchtown. Landon Collins. I would say it was very much like losing a Landon Collins, and although he was from out of state, this is very much like losing a Joe McKnight. I think it has the same type of impact because people thought they had him and what he could do and things like this. And Patrick Surtain has the possibility of being a Patrick Peterson type cornerback in college. He's that good. Come in and see the field against Miami. He's that good. So to lose somebody quality that good, and then Mario Goodrich, you need 2 cornerbacks, and they didn't get either one of them.
Did you get the kid from Joseph from Scotland?
Yes, and he's going to play cornerback now. Right. That's what Coach O talked about. He is a natural safety, but a very, very talented defensive back. It won't be a tough challenge for him because he is skilled enough to play cornerback, but he's not a natural cornerback. He's more of a free safety type of guy. So it's going to be a little bit work in progress there with him. I don't know, Christian Fulton, what's going to happen with him? The jury's out on that. And John Trey Kirkland, although most people think of him as being an athlete, they really, really heard a lot of rave reviews about John Trey Kirkland, who was at Lutcher, came as a quarterback, an athlete, and did some good things at cornerback. Only time will tell. And but I think that the overall class, and today was a disappointment for LSU fans because every fan, as you know, thinks that their school, no one should turn their school down, no matter where you are. And LSU fans just it stung a little bit, especially losing to Alabama. Right,
no doubt about it. Jamar Chase, though, does sign with LSU. There was a needed wide receiver, along with Marshall, the kid from North Louisiana. Pretty comparable set of receivers coming into Baton Rouge.
And I've said this many, many times, and Coach O said this today. Having Terrace Marshall and Chase sign are very, very much like a Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham combo. Those two can come in as freshmen and have and get significant reps because there's help needed. I think the leading receiver came back 14 catches a wide receiver. It's the most last year. So they need help there. They got size and speed and athleticism. This class of wide receivers is really going to be significant. But also they picked up in the early class Badora Traore, the tackle that is a plug-in and play. And Damian Lewis is a junior college guard that I think you may have signed in the early signing period, 2 starters right there on the offensive line, which you desperately needed.
Right, they got the 4-star kid Cherry also that they got in that early
outside linebacker.
Well.
He's 6'4", 225, and he's a guy who can rush the passer with his hand on the dirt or 2-point stance.
Based on what we saw so far today, and I guess we'll get the ratings over the next couple of days, I think Rivals had LSU dropping a slot at 13. Do you see them free falling? You see them dropping? You see them within the top 15, top 10?
I see them in the top 15. They could fall to 18 when it's all said and done, because Alabama, for one, had some more slots to fill. And some other schools, too, as well, that were behind LSU. So LSU could fall maybe to 18 to 20. Which is unlike what the fans are used to.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
And they need a quarterback, and that's something because I think that the 3 quarterbacks, scholarship quarterbacks on the roster right now, by the time August gets here, I really think either McMillan or Llewellyn Narcisse, if he doesn't get significant playing time, one of those guys is going to leave.
Transfer, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. Les, I'll tell you what, pretty volatile, as I mentioned on my show today. Orgeron came in as head coach of this team when taking the interim tag off of him. At that podium, he promised certain things. He promised beating Alabama out for 5-star athletes. That has not happened. He promised the best coordinators in America. He lost. They sold us on Matt Canada being the best offensive coordinator in America. He couldn't last a year. You had to pay Dave Aranda like a head coach to keep him. He promised putting a fence around Louisiana, not letting the best of Louisiana get away. For the most part, that has not happened. It's a small sample size on Ed Orgeron. You got to give him credit for keeping the team together, but one of the worst losses in the history of the series against Mississippi State, the loss to Troy, a really bad loss against Notre Dame in the bowl. All of a sudden, it looks as though this program is on a downward slide instead of, again, being upwardly mobile. You always seem to look at this with an even keel. What's your take on what's going on in Baton Rouge, taking the emotion out of the situation?
Well, I don't think there's any question that the 2018 season is going to go a long way toward determining whether Ed Orgeron has a long-term future as a head coach at LSU. I'm not saying that he has to win X number of games to keep his job. I'm just saying if that downward slide that is being perceived by a lot of people with good reason continues, it's going to be difficult for him to stick around for any significant period of time. If, however, they turn it around, he's done a nice job keeping it together last year after those 2 terrible losses you mentioned early in the season. If he can keep it together and things work out with Ensminger on offense and, they have a good year, then maybe things are different. But it's going to be a very important season for him as a head coach at LSU. But as far as today, you called it like Christmas Day, which is true, but I tend to be kind of Scrooge-like when it comes to National Signing Day, and it's significant in the fact that you talk about Alabama and LSU going head-to-head, and when the coach identifies certain players, we need these 3, 4, or 5 guys to be in this class, and they don't get them, that's a disappointment, that's a big loss. But ultimately, all that matters is how these guys play. And every year there are countless examples of 5-star guys that don't pan out, guys who aren't heralded, who have big careers. The Heisman Trophy was just won by a former walk-on. Okay, so let's not get too carried away with the rankings and where everybody is. Let's wait and see how these guys play. But based on the limited information we have now, today is understandably a disappointment for LSU. But when they kick it off in September, the only thing that's going to matter is how they play. And there are a lot of question marks about this team going into the next year.
Well, there's no doubt. And then the schedule is as daunting as it's been in years when you start looking at, again, the teams they have to play. Georgia and Alabama, both in the national championship, both coming to Baton Rouge. Miami on a neutral field at Florida. I mean, look, he knew what he was getting into. That schedule's been out there for a while now, so he knew what he was getting into. But this is not the year that you hope that maybe you can tread water. This is a tough year going in, especially with with, again, what I believe is the leash being kind of short on him because he was an interim coach. He didn't have the credentials to come in and take over this program. One of the things we were told was he was an excellent recruiter, and he has been throughout his career, but it hasn't shown up, again, when you look at the rankings, especially when you're, again, as you mentioned, well, when you get down to the last signing day and you've targeted certain players, those players have either been committed or leans to you for most of the year. In Surtain's case, for the last 3 years, he's been a strong lean to LSU, and you're not able to come up with it. It's going to be a difficult hurdle to overcome if you don't come out with a winning season this year. For Ed Orgeron, when you look at everything that's happened over the last year and a half.
Yeah, and you mentioned the schedule. They could be a better team and have a worse record next year just because of the quality of the competition, and that's all that's going to matter. Nobody's going to worry about, oh, well, they made strides in these areas. If they take a step back in the one-loss record, that's going to make things extremely difficult for him and for the coaching staff. So, again, it's not encouraging based on what's happened in recruiting, and as they do every year, they've lost a lot of important players, and they need guys to come in and play right away. And what's happened with the early signing period and what happened today are both not terribly encouraging. But again, I caution, let's wait and see what happens beginning in September in that first game with Miami.
Les makes a great point. You can look at LSU players that are in the pros right now that were 3-star and ultimately came to LSU. Not a lot of fanfare, and those guys not only had great careers at LSU, they've gone on to the pros.
Exactly, and the thing is too, and something you talked about, the schedule. A pair of teams that LSU has beaten in the past, new coaches, Texas A&M and Arkansas. They're not the teams that used to come in and LSU can say it's a possible win there. You got Jimbo Fisher now, and so it's a different landscape there. But you'd have thought that the success LSU turned out more NFL players than anybody in the SEC, and it doesn't always work. And sometimes when Nick Saban throws those rings on the table, that bling, catches the young man's eye. And Orgeron talked about keeping Alabama at bay. Watch the front door. Yeah. TCU, the mouse sneaks in the back door and steals the cheese. TCU with 5 signees in the top 50 in Louisiana. Alabama got 2. Right. TCU got 5 kids in the top 50 players in Louisiana. Who would have thought TCU, but you're batting down the hatches for Alabama. Right. Somebody else sneaks in the back door.
And I think that's a great point because looking toward the future now, and I'm talking about, going in and pitching a kid at the end, and you've got Jimbo Fisher to your west at Texas A&M. He's got a ring. He's got some bling. He's got inroads into Louisiana high school coaches. He knows the program. He's recruited Louisiana very well. As you mentioned, he throws the rings on the table. He'll even go out and do a line dance for you as well in a living room. Nick Saban, again, when he sits down with the parents of a kid or a kid, and he starts throwing out the fact that we're not rebuilding, we're reloading, and we're going to get another national championship. It's a little different for Ed Orgeron when he puts out his resume. When Les Miles sat there, he had that ring, but he also could throw a piece of paper on that table saying, these are all the kids that I put into the NFL. Orgeron hasn't done that yet, even though on the defensive line he's done a pretty good job. It almost seemed like an unbalanced playing field right now when you talk about Orgeron to Fisher to Saban. And, oh, by the way, you said TCU jumping in the back door, grabbing top 5 of the top 50. That can't happen either.
No, and this is going to be more of how good of a coach is Ed Orgeron and the staff now, because you may not have the pool of talent now is starting to get wider, and how good of a coach can you be? How creative can you be with a Dave Aranda and with Steve Ensminger if they can think the Alabamas and the Auburns now, because it's not that wide, but because LSU can't get all the people they need, you better be a good coach.
Right. And for the first time in a long time, the first time in my lifetime, and I've talked about it on this show and my radio show, there's not a bell cow running back in the wings. Look, I'm 57. I can remember listening and watching LSU football going back to 2 and 3 years old, and I always remembered the next back coming in. And I don't see that this year. And now you've got an unproven quarterback who didn't get a lot of time this year when he could have. That's another situation with Miles Brennan. You got a lot of really unknowns going into maybe the toughest schedule in recent LSU history.
Well, I think the most interesting thing to watch next season is going to be how the LSU offense evolves, because not only do they not have the clear-cut next big-time ball carrier like they've had for, I can't remember the last time it was quite like this.
Can you? I can't remember.
And it doesn't mean they won't run the ball well and they
Sure.
won't have a 1,000-yard rusher. We just don't know who it's likely to be at this point. It could be a true freshman. You also have the 2 stud wide receivers they signed, a commitment to a pro-style passing game with a sort of new offensive coordinator, and LSU fans, and a new quarterback. LSU fans have been looking for this for a long time, and there's going to be a transition where presumably the passing game is going to be a much bigger and LSU hopes more sophisticated part of this offense for the first time in a long, long time. And that may be good, it may be bad, it may be a mixed bag. But that whole transition on offense from the coordinator to the new quarterback to the talented receiver to the inexperience at running back, that's going to be the biggest factor, I think, in how this team does next year. And it's going to be fascinating to watch because people have been waiting so long to see this offense change in this direction. Let's see how successful they can be doing it, because they're going to have to be very successful at it if they're going to compete in the SEC with that schedule we talked about.
Rene, piggyback on his comments, if you will.
Well, and the thing is, I really can see this, and as I was watching the recruiting process go and things with the back and not seeing the back in here, you better really feel confident in that passing game now, because that's where you're going. And it looks like out of necessity or maybe out of plan that you're going to be focused a lot more, what the fans have been looking for now, that this is going to become a spread type offense, a wide open type offense, and the running back will have a smaller role because of able bodies. But this is the way you've loaded your team. You got receivers, buku now, and you better use them, and you better know how to use them.
Right. Fair, unfair question. You guys have covered Steve Ensminger. Ensminger obviously bleeds purple and gold. He's a former LSU quarterback. Why should the fans have faith that Ensminger can get it done?
He didn't become a bad coach all of a sudden. I know this is going back a long time, but when he was with Georgia back in the early '90s, he did Eric Zaya, Andre Hastings, Garrison Hurst. He had those guys, led the SEC in offense and scoring and everything else, and he knew how to use those guys. And yeah, they were good players, and they all went to the NFL. Zaya was a good player, but Steve is not. He hasn't become a bad coach. He knows how to coach. And I think he's smart enough to know what he can do with the players he has and what their strengths are. And he's going to have plenty of time in spring to sort things out and to see how he can utilize and see how good a Miles Brennan or Lowell Narcisse, how they can fit in. I still feel you're going to see both those quarterbacks, Lowell Narcisse and Miles Brennan. Lowell Narcisse, he won't win a Heisman maybe, but he's a lot like a Tebow, and like a Tim Tebow. And he, he's left-handed, but he can run. He's a powerful guy. He can throw the ball a lot better than people think. And I think you can utilize both of those quarterbacks.
Why should the fans have faith that Steve Ensminger can turn this offense around? Or should they?
Yeah, I think they should. I think you just look at the 2016 season and see the job he did when Orgeron got the job 4 games into the season. And the first thing he did, essentially, other than maybe he brought Pete Jenkins back first, but he made the change at offensive coordinator pretty fast. And he said, I know what I want to do on offense. We can be a lot better than we have been. He gave Steve Ensminger the job on the fly. He had an open date, and then he had to get ready for that next game. I think it was Missouri. And they went out and set all kinds of records. The offense was much, much better the rest of the season than it had been the first 4, and really for 2 or 3 years at the end of the Les Miles era. And he not only did he do a very good job, but it looks like he and Orgeron are on the same wavelength as far as what they want to do offensively, which clearly was not the case last year with Orgeron and Matt Canada. So I think you just say he knows what the head coach wants. They trust each other. He did it in 2016 under adverse circumstances. Well, let's give him a shot. He should be able to be successful this year. And I also agree. I think both of those quarterbacks are going to have a role in this offense.
And I'll say this quickly, Eric. If Miles Brennan is the starter, and it looks that way right now, he reminds me a lot in the way he delivers the ball and his style of a Tommy Hudson type guy, of a Tommy Hudson type player.
Sure.
And he's going to be a lot better than Danny Etling last year.
Coach O has said he's going to go the graduate assistant route to try to fill these last few slots. How realistic is that?
Well, you picked up some grad guys like Fihoko,
right,
who's going to be a starter. Jonathan Giles, who should be the best receiver on the roster next year. He had almost 70 catches for Texas Tech for 1,200 yards before he left there season. So if you can get those type of guys,
right.
But those guys are few and far between. But who would have thought Fihoko and Giles would fall in their lap?
Right.
And that's exactly what happened.
And I said graduate assistant, I meant graduate transfer.
Yes.
I was just thinking back. It's going to be fun to watch that first game with Miami because obviously the passing game is going to be much different than it has been. You might remember this. The first time they lined up against BYU this year in the Superdome, the two offensive linemen got up and they moved to the other side of the line, and the whole Superdome went, ooh. Like it was the most incredible thing they'd ever seen. Wow, they shifted two linemen because everything seemed so predictable previously. I think when the fans see them throwing the ball and the talent at wide receiver, there's a chance that right away they are at least going to be excited about what they're trying to do offensively. That remains to be seen how successful they are. But I think similar to the contrast with the past with Matt Canada's scheme, you're going to see that with the way the passing game is utilized. And I think that's going to make it a lot of fun to watch.
Tulane was in the top 70 after the early signing period. How did they do?
Really good. And, a few names off the top of my head, but they did good because they beat a lot of schools that they were never competed with. Example, they had a young man, defensive tackle Jeffrey Johnson, that he had some health issues, but at one time, Florida State, Alabama, Auburn were on him very, very strong. And through the process, they backed off a little bit, but they were very strong on him. And Tulane took him, and I think he should be a good player. Jamarian James is a young man from De La Salle, a little bit undersized, maybe 6'1.5". He reminds me a lot he could be a lot like a Tanzel Smart. Damian Tate, the young man they signed out of Warren Easton, is a lockdown, outstanding, very confident cornerback. Dorian Campbell, the guy who teamed up at Scotlandville as a safety as well. He's going to be, they rated him a 4-star with Kelvin Joseph, both safeties. Dorian Campbell, as you see the field. And there's a guy, Eugenie Booker, is a young man out of Florida, 5'11", 200 pounds, could be a slot guy, but he could be a running back, runs a 4.40, a 36-inch vertical, and he's a guy that locals are not familiar with, but he got some guys that I'm telling you, ACC schools and SEC schools were really going after very hard, and he found a way to get them to come to Tulane, and that's really upgrading the program.
Some highlights of some other Louisiana schools, if you would.
Louisiana Tech did very good. ULO, new coaching staff, it was a slow start. Tim Rebo at Nichols, not a big class, maybe 15 to 16, but he fills some spots. Southeastern with Frank Selfo coming in. He got some transfers from other schools, did very well. And Northwestern State also with a brand new coach, Brad Laird up there, seemed to do very, very well and hit the ground running and did a good job. UL Monroe and McNeese seemed to have done pretty well. A lot of guys from local, and all those schools recruit the state of Louisiana very well.
Yes, and 2019 is the year, right?
Oh yeah, it's. I came out with it's going to be on CrescentCitySports.com tomorrow or the next day or today, and I got my top 50 from the metro area, and I had to squeeze in about 55 guys to make 50. I mean, I got some ties. There's a lot of talent in the metro area.
Yeah, and of course, depending on what happens with Ed Ogeron going forward, this will be the year that he's really got to make hay. And the same would be said for the rest of the coaches around Louisiana, try to keep that talent in state.
And there's a lot of talent here. And for the first time in a long, long time, I can remember coming up with my top 50, and it's not a wide receiver. It's defensive tackle from a meet. Ismail Sosfer is the defensive tackle from a meet, and his running mate, a wide receiver, Devontae Lee, is the second best player in this area, metro surrounding area. So you got a defensive tackle that is among the best in the state and one of the best in the country, and he's right under LSU's nose, and boy, he's a must-get.
Rene Nadeau, CrescentCitySports.com, Les East of CrescentCitySports.com are our guests tonight. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Quick break, we'll come back, we'll switch to the pros, we'll talk some Pelicans, some Saints. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports.
Air conditioning, heating, and refrigeration has been family owned and operated since 1989. Burkhardt has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhardt's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhardt's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Amco Fence, locally owned and operated since 1976. Fully licensed and insured and a member of the BBB, Amco serves both residential and commercial customers. If you're looking to repair, replace, or install a fence for security or aesthetic reasons, Amco Fence supplies wooden, metal, chain link, vinyl, and ornamental or automatic gates. Amco aims to satisfy your fencing needs. Amco Fence, 504-468-9559 or amcofencecompany.com.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Les East and Rene Nadeau of CrestySports.com are our guests tonight. Guys, let's shift gears to the Pelicans. Tough spot for the Pelicans after losing Boogie Cousins to a ruptured Achilles tendon. They were really playing well 8 of the last 10 games before Boogie went down. They had an incredible win against Houston. They looked like they had really turned the corner. I mean, a lot of it had to do with Boogie Cousins, who I've been very, very critical on this show and my radio show. The guy has a tremendous amount of talent. He just wasn't playing basketball the right way. Finally, he started playing defense. He started running down the court. He was giving up the three-point shot for a better shot. And then the team kind of meshed around him. I mean, it was amazing how they had played during that stretch where, again, he, instead of making a bad pass, making the lob into Anthony Davis, which was almost unstoppable, all of a sudden that just goes to the wayside with Boogie Cousins' injury. And, of course, this team now is struggling to get back on track, only winning one game as of the taping of this show since Boogie Cousins' injury. Les, I'll start with you first. I mean, tough blow for this team, no doubt. But, again, Dell Demps seems like he's been cursed since he's been in New Orleans, with the exception of the Anthony Davis ping-pong ball falling the way of the Pelicans. Other than that, it seems like every player he's brought in has been often injured, hasn't played well with the Pelicans, goes on to another team, picks up where they left off previously. It's really been a sad state of affairs, but this is a tough situation now. They go out and get Niko Mirotic, who I think is a very good player. And by the way, as tough as I've been on Dell Demps, that was a great move on the part of Demps to get Mirotic. You give up Tony Allen and Nelson, and basically be able to get that Omer Ashik contract off the books. Had to give that number one pick up, but you're going to have to give that up anyway to get rid of that contract. Really good move on the part of Dell Demps to bring him in. But now there's a period where they're trying to kind of get it together. The big question going forward is, what happens with Boogie Cousins? You know, I'm of the opinion, 2-year deal, prove it to me deal. You don't want to get into a 5-year max deal where you're giving him $175 million or so. I mean, I think that's crazy. You just got out from under the Omer Ashik contract, and you know what an albatross that was around the neck of this franchise. If Boogie Cousins doesn't come back and is the Boogie Cousins of old, I mean, and who knows? Nobody knows that. One way or the other, this could be a really tough situation for this franchise going forward. This is a tough decision. The question is, who makes the decision? Will it be Dell Demps or someone else? But, the future Boogie Cousins here, let's talk about him first. And what do you think happens there? And then we'll kind of morph into the team and where we are now.
Well, it's complicated. I think you're right. They have to be more reluctant to give him a long-term max deal because of the uncertainty coming off of what's a very bad injury, especially for a big guy. So it makes more sense to go with a shorter term deal, sort of a prove me type contract, and just see. And, maybe after a year or 2 or 3, he proves to be worth the max deal after that. But you don't know that at this point. They did give themselves a little bit of leverage with not only bringing in Mirotic to try and salvage this season, but also that would mitigate the loss of Cousins in free agency if they aren't able to cut a deal with him. They would have another big guy, and they would still have, some pieces to work with. So it gives them. I don't think they're as dependent on signing Cousins to a long-term deal as they were before, and they would be rightly skeptical about doing that. So I think they have to try and get a short-term deal done with him to see what they have. I think his free agent market value will go down also because of the injury. They have more leverage also because of Mirotic. So I think suddenly the Pelicans have some more cards to play with in that deal. It's a little more complicated. I think they should try and get a short-term deal done with him. And, they were getting dangerously close to actually having a first-round pick to utilize. Yeah. So, and then this deal comes along and they're able to give one away, which they seem to do quite a bit. But I agree with you. It was a very good deal to bring Mirotic in. And if they can get something done with Cousins that makes sense, all of a sudden with those 3 big guys, it becomes a really fascinating situation going forward.
No doubt about it. The question going forward is this. Boogie Cousins, if he doesn't get the max deal, number one, is his feelings hurt. Because, again, everybody out here knows that they were planning on giving him the 5-year, $175 million max deal. Is he unwilling to do the 2-year prove-it-to-me deal in New Orleans? And then the question is asked that, what if there's a contender out there, a legitimate contender for an NBA title? And they say, wait a minute, we've got some cap room. We'll take a chance on a Boogie Cousins. We'll give him a 4-year deal, or we'll give him that 2-year prove-it-to-me deal. Why stay in New Orleans as opposed to going somewhere else where maybe you can win immediately, where they won't expect more of you than maybe they're going to expect in New Orleans? Look, the first year, as I said on my radio show after this happened, is a wash. I mean, he's not going to be the same player. He's going to be immobilized for 6 months. He may be ready for training camp. The techniques now, surgical techniques now, are more modern than they've ever been. That's why I really don't look at the Elton Brand type situation. That was 10 years ago. We're light years ahead of where they were 10 years ago in terms of the surgical procedures to fix an Achilles tendon. But at the same time, for a guy 6'11", 275, who's had a weight problem in the past, it's going to be a difficult situation for him to come back in that first year. If he comes back in the second year and he's the same player, fantastic, max him out, do what you have to do. The question is, why do it in New Orleans when maybe you could do it elsewhere? Maybe you're paying 25 minutes in another city instead of maybe the 30 or 40 minutes you'll have to play in New Orleans.
Well, it's the wild card in the whole thing is what you brought up, the possibility that all it takes is one team that's sitting there saying, we can fit you in here where we don't have to put as big a burden on you. There's more around you. You could be the final piece to a championship puzzle. And, this is a guy who has never played in a playoff game. And that's one of the elements of this injury that's so disappointing, is that he looked like he was probably going to get a chance to play in the playoffs for the first time. The injury happens. And so now I think he would have no problem taking on a diminished role to go to a championship contender somewhere else. If there's one team out there willing to make that push, I think he would be wide open to it, and I think the Pelicans might have to let him go or see if they can work out a sign and trade or whatever. So I think that's the wild card in the whole thing. Whether or not that team emerges or not, nobody knows. It could have something to do with how this year's playoffs go or any injury somewhere else. There may not be that team out there right now, but circumstances may dictate that another team goes after him with a role that fits with him perfectly. If that situation doesn't come along and he has to decide whether or not he's willing to take a 2 or 3 year deal for less money with the Pelicans, I think we're going to find out how mature he is at this point, and also how influential his agent might be and what his agent is thinking. Because do you understand the situation the Pelicans are in? Do you want to put down roots in a place like this, or are you still just worried about the dollars and the cents and not having your feelings hurt. We're going to learn, I think, a lot about his maturity and what his agent's interests are by how receptive he is to that kind of talk.
Rene, take us through the injury, your thoughts on the comeback, your thoughts on what the Pelicans should do or will do going forward with Boogie Cousins.
Well, I concur with a lot of what Les said, and the thing is that the Pelicans have dug a hole. They can't afford right now. I mean, a 1 or 2 year deal is the absolute most they can offer somebody with an injury like this. They can't take a chance. If they give him a 3 or 4 year contract, they've dug an even deeper hole if he doesn't come back anywhere near where he was. If he comes back 75%, the Pelicans right now have that gaping hole. They don't have a physical presence in the paint. Mirotic and Anthony Davis just don't fill that role. And they are shooters and they're outside guys. They don't have that physical presence. And if it comes to this, they're going to have to use the money that they would have given him if he does not return. And I can see, just a guess, that Boogie is going to be looking for the money, but he also wants to play for a contender. And that's when it comes to chasing the ring. And I think if he has 2 years here or 2 years somewhere else, he's gone. At Boston or somewhere else, that's where he's going. And the Pelicans better make sure they spend their money wisely, because if they dig a deeper hole, I mean, Osik should be a lesson learned.
Yes.
And you better make sure, because if you spend the money, you better make it spend it. If you don't spend it on Boogie, go get a big guy somewhere else, somebody that's going to be, is going to fit the role that you're looking for. And, the Pelicans have other issues. They are in the top 3 in turning the ball over, and giving up points and stuff like this. They're their own worst enemy. Yeah. I mean, they give 15 turnovers a game, over 15 a game. That's absurd. Yeah. And so you can't be giving away points like that because you're not playing a good defense. You're not a good defensive team. And again, it's just too many parts right now. I don't know where you start, but the Boogie thing is going to have to be addressed. If I was betting, I can see him going somewhere else next year.
It was a desperation move to bring him in. You put the chips on the table. You put it all on Boogie Cousins. It was unknown whether this was going to work or not. And let's just be honest with it about the whole situation. It was not working. It was, for the most part, it was not working up until the last 10 games before the injury, when things seemed to click. And there was no guarantee that was going to be something we were going to see for the last 30 games. So we don't know one way or the other whether this was going to work. And this, as Rene mentioned, they backed themselves in a corner with the salary cap. Because he's under contract, they have his bird rights, they have the ability to pay him more than anyone else, and still be able to go over the cap. They are so close to the luxury tax threshold right now, being a taxpayer, it's not even funny, closer than they've ever been in the history of the franchise. They've cast their lot with Drew Holiday. Mirotic has a $12.5 million contract next year. Anthony Davis has a max deal. Man, there's just not a lot of wiggle room out there for the Pelicans if they don't re-sign him with the money to be bringing someone else in. That's the tough part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think it's in their interest to try and bring him back, and that's why we think they had pretty much made up their minds before the injury.
They were maxing him out.
They were going to max out, and that would have made sense. The injury just puts them in such a difficult situation. Now, I'm of the mind that anybody who gets to be as good a player as DeMarcus Cousins is, especially as unusual a player as he is, to be that big and that strong and have those skills from the outside and putting the ball on the court, even though he does turn the ball over a lot. The skill level that he has at that size, you get to that point only by being dedicated and hardworking, and I think he will do the work and have the dedication necessary to recover as well as he possibly can from that injury. Now, it's still could be limitations on how far back he can make it, but I think you can be confident that he's going to do whatever he can to recover from that as best he can. And so I think that there's reason to be optimistic that he'll still be a very good player. But again, you can't give him a long-term max deal just because you're confident he's going to do the rehab. You still have to be judicious in your contract negotiations.
Well, and then there's the Anthony Davis factor in all this. Davis and and Cousins seem to have an affinity for each other. They like playing with each other. Look, from Anthony Davis' standpoint, Boogie kept the fives off of him. He kept those big players off of him. Now Davis has to deal with that with the last 30 games of the season, where he's got to deal with the NBA bigs. It's not something he wants to do. I think one day he will be an NBA center as he grows into his body, but right now he's a 4. He doesn't want to deal with the post. They look like they were getting along well. You could see how they were playing. I mean, how do you sell this to Anthony Davis if you don't max him out or you give him a 2-year prove it to me deal?
Well, without a doubt, Anthony Davis, in one way or the other, was in on a meeting that these are our options to bring in so and so and so and so and Mirotic, and what do you think? And I think he was in that small group that had something to say about it. They certainly asked his opinion on bringing Mirotic. What do you think? If whatever it may be, these are one of the players we can trade for. I think Anthony Davis was kind of happy with the trade under the circumstances, because he thinks maybe this will help a little bit, open up things. A big man can shoot from the outside, kind of like a Rene Anderson, maybe a little bit.
Absolutely.
And I think that
better rebounder, I think. Than
very much. And I think that Anthony Davis is on board, but he realizes that everything has to click for the rest of the season, the rest of the 29 games, including tonight's game. So you better win a little more than half of the remaining games, or you're in trouble. I mean, you can't win 6-8 games the rest of the way and make the playoffs. You won't be.
How do you sell this to Anthony Davis if ultimately you're not willing to put all your chips on Boogie Cousins signing to a max deal?
Well, it could get very interesting in that, when they acquired Cousins, they looked at it and they said, this is too good to pass up. We have to bring this in, even though they were going against the trend in the NBA by having the Twin Towers type of deal, which, as you pointed out, took a long time before it seemed like it was starting to come together. If they don't think this is going to work out financially with the terms, they could remake the entire manner in which this team plays and abandon the Twin Tower concept, because Mirotic is not the big body, even though he's a tall guy.
Yes.
He's not a big body like Cousins. And if you can't come to terms with Cousins, then maybe you fill in around those two guys, Davis and Mirotic, with different sets of skill players, and the whole manner in which this team plays could change dramatically and possibly for the better. Right. So I think what you have to do is convince Anthony Davis, look, we stepped up and we paid you. We made the trade for Cousins. We were ready to bring him back. When we lost him, we made the trade for Mirotic. We've proven to you how committed we are to making this thing work. Now, if we can't make it work with Cousins with a new contract because of these complications, we think we should have earned your trust that we're still going to do what's necessary to make you part of a championship contender. And I think they can make a pretty good case that they have made the effort to put the pieces around him, and if Cousins doesn't wind up being a long-term piece, that they can still find another way to make this work.
Let's talk about the now, and the frustrating thing for me about the Pelicans is, especially Pelicans post-Boogie, with the exception of the game against Oklahoma City, the effort, the energy. I'm sorry, defense is about effort and energy. These are guys that should be playing for their NBA lives right now. They understand the situation with the playoffs, where they are. They're in a little bit of a free fall right now. Not closing out on shooters, not playing strong defense. And then, of course, Alvin Gentry giving the excuse, almost playing into the excuse the other night against Utah. They just hit wide open. They hit shots. They were hitting wide open shots. And it's been a tale of the entire season. The difference is you could mask those deficiencies with two big men. Now those deficiencies are no longer masked. They've got to go out and they've got to play 48 minutes of strong basketball, aggressive basketball on the offensive end and the defensive end. That means not settling for outside jumpers, attacking the basket, again, doing what you need to do on defense, attacking on defense, understanding what you have to do on the pick and roll, on the switch, etc. They haven't done that to this point. And if they don't do that, they're going to be outside looking in on the playoffs no matter what. How do you change the mindset on what's going on with this team right now? I understand they're in a little bit of a limbo, but come on. It's about effort at the end of the day, and they're not putting out the effort where it counts on the defensive side of the ball, and they're settling for outside shots when they should be aggressive and taking it to the hole on offense.
Well, I think you hit on the most disturbing thing about that lost to Utah, gave up 133 points, I think it
Ridiculous.
was. And it wasn't just Gentry, it was the players in the locker room afterwards. It was kind of like, well, they were making shots. Nothing we could do about it. Well, there were a lot of shots that probably could have been contested a little bit better. A lot of effort, which has been lacking quite a bit with this team over the course of the season, before the injury and after the injury. So the idea that they're suddenly going to start playing harder on the defensive end, I don't see anything to suggest that's likely to happen. And the comments after the Utah game kind of gave you the impression that they don't get it. The coach doesn't get it. The players don't get it. Maybe the coach gets it, but he realizes the players don't get it, and he can't find a way to get them to get it.
And it's a players' league now, so you got to kind of tread lightly.
So that was disturbing, and y'all have seen enough games over the years. One thing that has struck me now that the NBA has been here for a while now is that the first game after the All-Star break is like night and day. The good teams, the level of intensity goes through the roof.
Yes.
And the teams that aren't legitimate playoff teams don't do that, and they aren't ready for it. So if this team's having trouble playing defense right now and putting forth the effort, wait until they come out of the All-Star break and see how the Warriors and the Spurs and maybe even the Thunder and certainly the Rockets and a lot of these other teams, when they see that level of intensity go up, let's see if they're ready for it. I have my doubts.
You covered basketball for a long time, Rene. I mean, it's about energy and effort. We're not seeing it out of this team.
And, I'm going to tell you something. Playing defense in the NBA is no different than a wide receiver on a football field blocking. No different. It's all about effort and technique. That's all it is. If you want to be a receiver and a blocker, just technique and effort, and it's all you. And it's just not there. And the only leader you have in that Pelicans locker room, and Les knows this better than I, is Rajon Rondo. That's the only guy really who has a voice. And you're talking about how they're going to sell us on Anthony Davis. Well, the way it's heading right now, it'll be the next coaching staff and general manager's job to do that, because these guys, I don't know if they've lost it, but man, you can't have an effort like against the Houston Rockets a couple of weeks ago or against OKC and then, just lay an egg. You just can't do it. It's inconsistencies. These guys have made too much money. And Alvin Gentry, with all respect, he's been around enough. Maybe sometimes he throws his hands up and says, I've done everything I can.
Well, he can't be an enabler. And I understand it's a player's game. But, I mean, look, I watch every press conference. And it's the same comments. It's an excuse-laden press conference. There's only been a couple press conferences this year where he really took the team to task and was disgusted. But you need more of that. I mean, I'm not trying to compare him to Sean Payton or any other. It's a different league. Basketball, NBA is a different league than the NFL. But at some point, we see it with other coaches that are demanding. I mean, look what happened up in Boston, how they changed that around, that culture around. At some point, you got to be able to change the culture. And right now, they're having a difficult time. And let me say this last point on this. If the rest of the season you're banking on other teams tanking so you can make the playoffs, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah, and that was like that seemed to be the feeling seemed to be the most encouraging thing about making the playoffs was when the Clippers sent Blake Griffin to the Eastern Conference. Like, okay, well now if they're going to throw in
Utah's going to get rid of Favors, and Hood. I mean, is that what you're banking on at this point?
Yeah, and instead the focus needs to be on we need to turn it up a notch. We need to find ways to go out and not only grab one of those 8 spots, but see if we can move up in the standings, which they were doing prior to the injury. And since then, they've sunk quite a bit. They're in the 8th spot now, and it's not encouraging. The trade was encouraging in that I think they now have enough talent that they can win enough games to maybe still get in the playoffs. But what we've seen from an effort standpoint, both before the latest trade and in the couple of games since then, are not encouraging. And we'll find out a lot more over these next few games before the break, but we'll find out a lot more as soon as they come back. I think they play the Lakers on Ash Wednesday and then go to the All-Star break. When they come out of the All-Star break, we'll know more about them, but it's not encouraging at this point.
Rene, football season just ends, but it really hasn't ended because within a month it'll be free agency. What are the needs for the New Orleans Saints?
Linebacker, rush end, wide receiver, and probably 1A or 1B is offensive lineman. Senio Clemente, you don't know what's going to happen with him. And they really need to add at least 2 in the draft and a top flight free agent in offensive line. You really need to add somebody again, whether Clemente comes back or not. You need that. You're going to lose. I don't think Zach Strief is going to come back, and I think you need to add something there. You do need to add a wide receiver. Brandon Coleman's been okay. Willie Snead's been okay, but besides Michael Thomas, you really need somebody that can match him and take some attention away from him. A rush end. Okafor, we don't know if he's coming back. Achilles. They did outstanding in free agency last year. The Saints did. They need to add another linebacker and a defensive back. Delvin Breaux, we're not sure what his future is, if it's even going to be here.
Right. And that's an interesting comment about Delvin Breaux, because the question is, do you tender him with a draft choice to try to hold on to him in New Orleans, or ultimately let another team come in and have to give you a draft pick to take him? But if you do that, you're paying him, and again, that's a catch-22 there. Do they trust him enough with the injuries to do that? It's going to be interesting to see if Delvin Breaux's on this team next year.
Well, that's a flip of a coin. It's not like the Boogie Cousins decision, but it's really close. You got to make up your mind, because you got to watch how you spend your money, because Saints at that salary cap bites you really quick.
And you do have a situation where you have to re-sign Drew Brees, and I don't anticipate a hometown discount. I do anticipate a cap-friendly deal, though. Your thoughts on the needs of the New Orleans Saints going into free agency, and of course, whatever they don't get in free agency, that's where they fill in the holes during the draft.
Yeah, and first of all, about the draft, let's calm people down now. People are thinking, boy, if they could just have another draft like last year.
Well, they're drafting 27.
Yeah,
and they don't have a second-round pick.
They're not going to have a draft like last year. Okay, they don't have they're not armed with the picks necessary to have anything close to last year. But hopefully, they can still get some help.
But you have faith in Ireland, though. The last 2 drafts have proven he has an eye for talent.
Yeah, and I think that's something that probably doesn't get talked about enough, is the role Jeff Ireland has had in the last 2 drafts. I agree pretty much with what you said about the positions they need to fill. I would also throw in tight end. If the right opportunity comes along, I don't think they're going to use a high draft pick necessarily or spend a lot of money in free agency, but I think they would like to upgrade the tight end position if they can do it in a sensible way. Certainly pass rusher from the outside has to be addressed one way or another. Perhaps it's Okafor, but we don't know because of the injury, and he's also a free agent. It could be it's a defensive end, could be a linebacker, it could be a hybrid type, but somehow they have to have another pass rusher from the outside. Delvin Breaux, if I had to guess, I would say that he probably will not be here. I don't think they've ruled that out by any means. I just think because they have other needs and because of the uncertainty, because of the injuries, it's going to be difficult to come to terms with him with a deal both sides are happy with. Maybe they'll be able to get it done, but I think the odds are it doesn't happen. And certainly it all hinges on getting a deal done with Brees, but I think it's so much in both sides' interest to get it done that it will get done.
Yeah, I don't think Brees comes out on the Ellen show and makes the proclamation he'll be a Saint for life. I don't think he's been talking to everyone saying he's not worried about the deal done if he doesn't really feel good about this deal getting done very quickly. And they have to get it done. There's that $18 million of dead money out there. They have to fold that in somehow into this contract. They can't allow that money to be out there. So, again, they're up against the clock as well.
Well, and the thing is, I think what makes a difference there, if they'd gone 7-9 again, Drew might have said, I'm going somewhere where I can win another ring.
Yes.
He looks at Alvin Kamara. He looks at Marshawn Lattimore. He looks at what happens, and he says, no, this is unquestioned. That was the only missing piece in New Orleans, was whether he could win another Super Bowl here. He can win another Super Bowl here, so that there's no reason for him not to get the deal.
A lot of the media is picking the Saints as the Super Bowl favorite in the NFC for next year. We'll hopefully that's not the kiss of death. Rene, Nadeau, Lsu, CrestCitySports.com, and so much more. Thanks so much for being on our panel tonight.
Thanks, Eric.
Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night at 10 o'clock right here on WLAE-TV. Also on Pelican Sports Television, that's 9 o'clock every Friday. Catch me on the radio, Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2, the iHeartRadio app, each and every weekday. That's noon to 2. Also, ericasher.com is where you can download the podcast and also listen live. Also, sports1280.com. You can catch all the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports at ericasher.com as well. And special thanks to our guests tonight, Rene, Nadeau, and also Leslie's. Also, Jim Dotson, Ron Yeager, Naila Jones, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for watching. Everyone have a happy and safe Mardi Gras. We'll see you right back here next Thursday night for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
Located on Lake Pontchartrain, Frisbee's Lakefront Restaurant and Bar offers traditional West End favorites, a scenic view, oysters, and numerous tasty options. More information is available at 504-304-4125 or brisbeesrestaurant.com.